It was supposed to be a peaceful family trip, just a mother, her daughter, and the man caught between them. But before dawn, one would be gone forever, and the others would be running from what they'd done. This is what really happens when family turns deadly. When police arrived at the Martin Landing campground in Palmer, Idaho, they didn't find a robbery or a random act of violence. They found a plan, cold, deliberate, and whispered into motion by someone no one ever suspected. A mother-in-law from hell. Her name was Rosalie Morris, and what she orchestrated would shake her family, her community, and the courtroom that would one day hear her name. Because sometimes, the most dangerous place in the world is the one where you think you're safe with family. Travis Columpet was the kind of man people described as loyal, stubborn, and fiercely devoted to family. He had his flaws, most men do, but to his sister, Anna Norris, he was the person who called every Sunday, the one who always showed up when something broke, the one who never forgot her birthday. He grew up in Idaho, surrounded by pine trees, dirt roads, and a small-town kind of honesty. For him, love wasn't about romance, it was about building something steady. That's what he wanted when he met Melissa, a soft-spoken woman with dark hair and a quiet smile. They married young, raised children, and for a while, it looked like they'd found that steady life. But behind closed doors, their marriage began to crack. The fights grew louder, the trust weaker. Friends say they could see it unravel. The jealousy, the distance, the cold silence that replaced conversation. By 2024, Travis and Melissa were living separate lives, connected only through their children and the residue of what once was. And in the middle of that collapsing marriage was another figure, Melissa's mother, Rosalie Morris. Rosalie was 60 years old, living in Battle Mountain, Nevada. Two neighbors. She was just another older woman with a soft voice and a polite smile. She went to church, spoke about faith, and carried herself with quiet composure. But those who knew her best say she could be controlling a woman who needed to fix everything, to keep her family under her roof and under her rule. When Melissa told her mother about the fights with Travis, the anger, the accusations, Rosalie's protectiveness shifted into obsession. She told friends that Travis was dangerous, that he was manipulative, that he was evil. It's unclear how much of that was true and how much was fear feeding fear. But one thing is certain, by the summer of 2024, Rosalie wasn't just offering advice, she was preparing for something darker. In early July, Melissa received a message from Travis. He wanted to meet, to talk things through, maybe about the children, maybe about closure. To Travis, it was a chance to clear the air. To Melissa, it was something else entirely. In their home in Nevada, Rosalie and Melissa held a meeting, not a conversation about healing, but about killing. Investigators later testified that Rosalie had called her family together that day. Her voice was calm as she discussed ways to end Travis's life. They talked about using propane, about drugs, about simply shooting him. It was methodical, clinical, and when the meeting ended, the plan was set. The next morning, mother and daughter loaded their car and drove north toward Idaho. The drive from Battle Mountain to Palmer takes about 7 hours, endless desert highways and open sky. Somewhere along that lonely stretch of road, they rehearsed what they were about to do. Travis thought he was meeting Melissa for a final conversation, a chance to end things peacefully. She told him to meet her at the Martin Landing campground, near the Snake River, where they used to spend summers together. To him, it was familiar ground. To them, it was the perfect trap. As the sun set over Palmer, the campground was quiet. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. The water shimmered under the dying light. Melissa arrived with her mother beside her. Travis showed up not long after, unarmed, unsuspecting. We don't know the exact words exchanged that night, but detectives believe an argument broke out, short, sharp, and final. Within moments, a gun was raised. One shot tore through the quiet air, echoing through the trees. Travis fell where he stood. There were no screams, no calls for help, just silence. Then, headlights cutting through the darkness as Rosalie and Melissa drove away. They didn't call 911. They didn't stay. Instead, they discarded the gun, the weapon that ended Travis's life, and his cell phone, leaving his body behind in the woods. For them, it was done. The problem was gone. But for investigators, the nightmare was just beginning. When Travis didn't show up the next day, his family knew something was wrong. He always answered his phone. He always checked in. Anna Norris tried calling, texting, nothing. Days passed before search teams were sent out to the campground. and when they arrived, the scene spoke volumes. Signs of a struggle, disturbed dirt, a dark stain near the fire pit. Travis's body was found soon after. He'd been shot once in the chest, a clean, fatal wound. Whoever killed him had done it with precision. Detectives began piecing together a timeline. The last person to see Travis alive was Melissa, but her story didn't hold up. She told investigators she'd met him briefly, that he'd been angry, and that she'd left before anything happened. But evidence quickly contradicted her. Tire tracks matched her vehicle. Phone records placed her near the site long after she claimed to have gone. And then there was Rosalie. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. At least, that's what she initially told police. But inconsistencies began to appear in her account. She hesitated under questioning. She contradicted her daughter's version of events. And when investigators dug into her phone records, they discovered something chilling. A digital trail that placed her right there, alongside her daughter, at the Martin Landing campground. When detectives confronted her, Rosalie maintained an eerie calm. She said she didn't pull the trigger. She said she just wanted to protect her daughter. But as one detective later testified, Rosalie spoke of the murder as though it were a necessary act. Back in Nevada, neighbors began to hear whispers. Some couldn't believe it, that Rosalie, the woman who baked for church fundraisers, was now being accused of helping plan a murder. But others weren't shocked. One woman told reporters, Rosalie always said Travis was no good. She said she was scared for her daughter. I just didn't think she meant it like that. Meanwhile, detectives continued building their case. They uncovered the family meeting, the one held just a day before Travis's death. During that meeting, Rosalie and her family openly discussed methods of killing. That piece of evidence changed everything. It proved that this wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. By late 2024, the Canyon County Sheriff's Office had enough. Both Rosalie and Melissa were arrested and charged. Melissa for first-degree murder and Rosalie for aiding and abetting. The arrests sent shockwaves through both Idaho and Nevada. Court documents described Rosalie as the architect of the plan, the one who spearheaded the murder. Prosecutors would later say that without her, Travis might still be alive. As news of the murder spread, public outrage grew. How could a mother and daughter plot something so cold-blooded together? It was a question that even seasoned detectives struggled to answer. In her first court appearance, Rosalie looked composed. Her voice was quiet, her hands folded neatly. She didn't cry. She didn't look at the cameras. But when the judge read the charge, aiding and abetting in the second-degree murder of Travis Columpet, she flinched. For the first time, her mask cracked. The prosecution called her the mastermind. The defense called her a broken woman, reacting to fear. Somewhere between those two portrayals, the truth sat heavy in the air. A mother who crossed the line between protection and destruction. As the pre-trial hearings dragged on, new details surfaced. Messages between Rosalie and her daughter painted a picture of obsession. There were angry texts about Travis, emotional rants about how he had destroyed their family, and chillingly, a message from Rosalie saying she wished he would just disappear. When confronted with those messages, Rosalie didn't deny them. She simply said, "I was venting." But to investigators, it sounded like intent. The case gained national attention. Small-town murder, family betrayal, premeditated planning. News outlets called it the campground killing, and behind every headline was a grieving sister, Anna Norris, trying to make sense of what had happened. She told reporters, "He didn't deserve that. He should still be here." Her voice cracked as she said it. She had already lost her mother and grandmother that same year. Losing her brother felt like losing the last piece of her family. As the case moved toward trial, both Rosalie and Melissa maintained their innocence in public, though evidence was mounting fast. Prosecutors were confident. They had motive, means, and opportunity, and most damning of all, confession-like statements. But there was something else lurking beneath the surface, something that would soon divide the courtroom. Rosalie's defense claimed that she had acted out of fear, that Travis had sent her threats, pictures of family members, messages saying he'd pick them off one by one if Melissa didn't come back. Prosecutors called it Facebook nonsense. They said there was no evidence of real danger, no police reports, no proof of violence. To them, it was all part of Rosalie's justification, an excuse to mask the truth. The truth was that she wanted Travis gone, and when the moment came, she made sure it happened. As her trial date drew closer, one haunting question lingered among investigators and the victim's family alike. Would Melissa have ever pulled that trigger? if her mother hadn't told her to. The courtroom in Caldwell, Idaho, was packed. The air inside was thick, not with noise, but with tension. Families sat on opposite sides of the aisle, one grieving, one accused. Cameras weren't allowed, but the weight of the story hung over every wooden bench and every whispered prayer. Rosalie Morris sat quietly at the defense table. Her hair was neatly tied back, her hands folded on her lap. She looked more like a grandmother than a murderer. Yet, in the eyes of the prosecution, she was the architect of a crime so cruel it left even the judge struggling for words. The prosecution began with the facts, cold, clinical, and devastating. They described how Rosalie and her daughter lured Travis to that campground, how they discussed multiple ways to kill him, propane, drugs, and finally, a gun. How Rosalie herself had gathered the family days before to decide how to make it happen. One by one, detectives took the stand. Detective Odenberg recounted the investigation, how the digital trail led them from Idaho back to Nevada, how messages between mother and daughter laid bare the plan, how Rosalie's fingerprints were found on items tied to the crime. Each piece of testimony built the same picture, a mother orchestrating her son-in-law's death like a chess move. Prosecutor Chris Boyd rose and faced the jury. His voice was calm but sharp. "This was not a moment of fear," he said. "This was not a woman cornered. This was a woman who made a choice, a deliberate, planned, and calculated choice to end a man's life." The state called the act cold and premeditated. They argued that Rosalie wasn't manipulated or coerced. She was the driving force. Deputy Prosecutor Carson Vito put it even more bluntly. She wanted him dead, and nothing was going to stop her. Then came the defense. They didn't deny that Travis had died at the hands of Melissa. They didn't even deny that Rosalie had been there. Their argument was built around one word: fear. According to the defense, Travis had been sending threatening messages. He'd sent pictures of family members, showing he knew where they lived. One message allegedly read, "If you don't bring her back to me by morning, I'll pick you off one by one." Rosalie's attorney painted a picture of a terrified woman, a mother who believed her family was in danger. He said her actions weren't evil, but desperate. He told the jury she believed she was protecting her daughter. And for a moment, there was silence in the courtroom, because no one could deny that a mother's instinct to protect runs deep. But when the state presented its rebuttal, that fragile narrative fell apart. Prosecutors revealed that no actual evidence supported the threats. No screenshots, no saved messages, no police reports. They called it Facebook nonsense, an online argument blown out of proportion and twisted into justification for murder. There was no danger, Prosecutor Vito said flatly. Only two women, feeding off each other's fear, until fear turned into fantasy, and fantasy turned into death. When Rosalie took the stand, she was calm. Her voice never rose. She talked about her childhood, her faith, her trauma. She said she had grown up afraid, and that fear had followed her into adulthood. "I was just trying to keep my family safe," she said softly. "I never wanted it to end this way." But the prosecution's cross-examination sliced through her composure. They showed the text messages, her words, her plans, her cold phrases about how it had to be done. Each message landed like a blow. "You didn't try to stop her," the prosecutor said. "You planned with her." Rosalie paused, her eyes lowered to the table. "I didn't pull the trigger," she whispered. The prosecutor's reply was icy. "No, but you loaded it." The verdict came quickly. The jury found Rosalie Morris guilty of aiding and abetting in the second-degree murder of Travis Columpet. She showed little reaction, no tears, no outburst, just a faint nod, as if she had been waiting for it all along. But the real reckoning came at sentencing. October 23, 2025, Canyon County Courthouse. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, painting pale light across the wooden benches. Judge Randall Grove entered the courtroom, his expression unreadable. Before him sat a woman whose choices had set an entire tragedy in motion. He began by acknowledging the magnitude of the crime. "This," he said slowly, "is about the most extreme act a person can commit." His tone was even, but each word carried weight. He turned to Rosalie. "Your goal," he said, "was essentially to treat Travis Columpet like a dog, to put him down." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge described her actions as unacceptable, regardless of whether they were born from calculation or fear. "Either way," he said, "a man is dead, and you played a leading role in that death." The prosecution pushed for life, a sentence of 30 years fixed before parole eligibility. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing her age, her remorse, her trauma. When Rosalie spoke, her voice trembled. "I regret that day," she said. "I've learned to turn everything over to God. I just hope something beautiful can still come from this." But her words fell flat in the shadow of what she had done. Anna Norris, Travis's sister, approached the podium next. Her voice shook with grief and fury. "He didn't deserve this," she said. "He should still be here with me and my family. You didn't just take my brother, you took the last piece of us." She paused, wiping her eyes. "I've lost my mother, my grandmother, and now my brother, all in a matter of months. And you expect mercy? You don't deserve freedom." Judge Grove listened, hands folded, eyes solemn. When it was over, he spoke the words that sealed Rosalie's fate. "Rosalie Morris," he said, "you are sentenced to 30 years in prison, with 18 years fixed before eligibility for parole." It wasn't the life sentence prosecutors wanted, but it was enough to ensure Rosalie would spend most of her remaining life behind bars. As deputies led her away, she turned once toward her daughter Melissa, who sat in silence, awaiting her own sentencing the following month. Their eyes met briefly, two women bound by blood and betrayal. Then Rosalie was gone. In the weeks that followed, the community struggled to make sense of what had happened. Kenyon County wasn't used to this kind of crime, a mother and daughter conspiring to kill the man once part of their family. Neighbors in Battle Mountain were stunned. "She wasn't like that," one woman said. Rosalie was gentle. She helped with bake sales. She prayed with people, but others admitted that they had seen something dark beneath the surface. She was controlling. One neighbor confessed. She needed to be in charge of everything, her daughter, her grandkids, everyone. Maybe this was just the extreme version of that. The sheriff's office released a statement thanking the community for its cooperation. Prosecutor Chris Boyd said he hoped the sentence would prevent her from ever taking another life. As for Melissa, she awaited her own day in court. Prosecutors believed she had pulled the trigger, but they also knew she had been under her mother's influence. Her sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Detectives often talk about certain cases that stay with them, the ones that haunt them long after the courtroom lights fade. For many involved in this one, it wasn't the violence that lingered, but the betrayal. A mother planning death with her own daughter, a family meeting about murder, a life extinguished, not by strangers, but by the people who once said, "I love you." The case left more questions than answers. Why didn't Rosalie walk away? Why didn't she call the police if she truly believed there were threats? And, perhaps most painfully, would Melissa have ever killed Travis without her mother's guidance? Judge Grove himself voiced that same question in court. "The sad thing," he said, "is that we'll probably never know whether your daughter would have pulled that trigger if you hadn't started this." For Anna Norris, those words were both haunting and hollow. They didn't bring her brother back. They didn't fill the empty chair at family gatherings or silence the nightmares. She still visits his grave in Idaho, a small headstone beneath a tree near the river. She brings flowers, sometimes letters. In one of her statements to the court, she said, "Travis was my big brother. He protected me, and I couldn't protect him." That line, quiet, broken, captured everything this case represented. The way love, when twisted by fear and manipulation, can become something monstrous. In the end, Rosalie's story isn't just about crime. It's about the danger of obsession disguised as protection, about how faith and fear can blur until morality collapses. She believed she was saving her daughter, but what she really did was destroy her family. And somewhere in the silence of that Idaho campground, where the wind still moves through the trees, the echo of that single gunshot remains, a reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear most are the ones sitting right beside us.